Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren Manier, and I am a program associate here at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and I work on our NSF-funded IUSE Award, the AAAS IUSE Initiative. We are excited to bring you today's workshop titled Vision into Practice, an Emerging Theory of Change for Integrating Undergraduate Education Research into Departmental and Institutional Cultures, featuring Dr. Mitch Malachowski and Dr. Jeffrey Osborn. Before we dive in, I have a few housekeeping notes. This presentation is being recorded, and a recording will be made available on the AAAS IUSE website in the archive section of the Summer Labs page. A portion of this event will take place in breakout rooms. Breakout rooms will not be recorded. Additionally, we do have closed captioning for this workshop, and you can download and view the full transcript by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Also, be sure to join the conversation on Twitter, tweeting with us using hashtag IUSEinsights. And if you haven't done so already, you can follow us on Twitter at IUSE Program and on LinkedIn at AAAS-IUSE Initiative. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone we will have a two-part workshop coming up next week titled Pedagogical Professional Development for STEM Faculty, From Individual Change to Community Empowerment. Part one of the workshop will take place on Tuesday, June 15th, and there will be a working session the following day on Wednesday, June 16th. Both of the sessions are from 1:30 to 3:30 Eastern Time, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you there. So now, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our presenters today, Dr. Malachowski and Dr. Osborn.
Thank you so much. I'm going to lead off. So I'm Mitch Malachowski from the University of San Diego. My co-presenter, Jeff Osborn, is the provost at the College of New Jersey. Jeff's going to pull up the slides, so I have something to work from. We have other folks on our IUSE grant who are not with us today. Did I lose? Did I lose the slide?
Can you see it?
I can see it now, Jeff. Thanks. So our co-PIs include Carrie Caruxis from Harvey Mudd. She's here on the call. So if you have any difficult questions, I'm going to force Carrie to answer all the hard questions. Jeff and I will do the easy questions for you. Carrie is a chemist at Harvey Mudd. Beth Ambos was the NEO of the Council on Undergraduate Research. She's now an independent consultant. Jillian Kinsey from Indiana University is an assessment guru, and Lindsay Curry, who is the NEO of the Council on Undergraduate Research, is also involved in this project. Next slide, please. So we'd like to just start by asking you to share with us what brought you here today. We're curious as to what your interests are, and if you can just put them in the chat, Jeff will just sort of take some notes, and we'll try to address whatever questions you might have or interests that you might have specifically as we try to work our way through the session. So if you would do that at your leisure, I guess, or right now. So I see there's already one saying theory of change. So good luck to all of us in generating theories of change. It's a big part of what we're working on now. So we'll be talking about that and how we've developed ours and where we are in terms of that. So if you could just put those things in, we'd appreciate it, and we'll see what we can do in terms of addressing your particular interests. Next slide. So we're going to start by giving you some background on our project, and then we will ask you to do some activities once we do some of the preliminary work. So we'll talk about the background and then an overview of the project, how we designed it, some of the outcomes, some of the initial outcomes that we have at this point in time, and then our what we call emerging theory of change. The word emerging is important because then we can discard a lot of what we're thinking maybe early on and modify things, but that's where we are at this point. We'll describe where we are as we go along. Next slide. So years ago, we really needed to. So we're connected to the Council on Undergraduate Research. Jeff and I don't work for the Council on Undergraduate Research, but the grant that we're talking about flows through CUR, and the PIs that were listed are the active participants in the grant. But years ago, we used to have to make the case for undergraduate research. I don't think we need to make that case. That case has been made of the importance and what people can do with undergraduate research. But to me, it's a three-part deal. There are student benefits, faculty benefits, and institutional benefits. There's students' cognitive growth, effective development, personal growth of faculty in terms of output and outcomes, mentoring, teaching, relationships with students, job satisfaction. And for institutions, some of it's ego and prestige. Some of it is connecting learning to what goes on to learning outcomes, hiring faculty, recruitment. I don't think the case really needs to be made anymore about the importance of this high impact practice. Next slide. So we wanted to give you some background though I'm sorry, the educational gains, and it really is an important point, and that is there are enough studies now showing that underserved students have greater gains when they're involved in undergraduate research activities. Yet undergraduate research is not as widespread as we would like. So we really do want to make inroads into connecting students from underrepresented groups to this high impact practice. Next slide. So here's the background on how we got here. About 25 years ago, through CUR, we started offering what we called institutes. And we've been at this for quite a while, and we found that folks came in teams. It'd be 10 to 15 institutions of teams of 4 or 5 people, and they wanted to institutionalize undergraduate research. We offered these for about 10 years, and we decided, this is a fundable idea. We really should go to NSF, and we did. So between 2007 and 14, we started offering workshops through CCLI grants, which became TWOS grants, which became IUSE grants. So we've lived through those changes, but we offered a whole series of regional workshops. We wanted to build capacity within a region of the country, 8 different regions. And then we moved on to the next grant, which was, we wanted to bite off a sort of bigger entity. So we worked with state systems and consortia, and to sort of harness whatever the power of the state systems and consortia offices to help the institutions in that system move forward in terms of undergraduate research. So we work with the California state system, for example, the University of Wisconsin system, the City College in New York, the Pennsylvania system, the Great Lakes Association, COPLAC, and we worked that through. And we felt that there were some pretty good successes in there. And at the same time, we've been offering topical workshops. I won't talk about those at all, but we connected undergraduate research to high impact practices. So in a way, we've been at this for quite a while. And amazingly, we've worked with about 700 institutions at this point in time in helping them, as we say, live their dreams, create their dreams, live those dreams. And there's been a lot of success stories, I think, that have come from what we've done. Next slide. We, if you're interested, published about 6 years ago now, in the Josie Bass New Directions for Higher Education series, our theory of change model connected to working with systems and consortia, and the issues that go with a bigger entity being involved in these kinds of activities. And you can see that if you're interested. Next slide. Well, a funny thing was happening that occurred over time, and that was when we first started these workshops, people were interested in doing undergraduate research. One-on-one mentored the kind of science model of doing undergraduate research, and we know there are other models that people can do, can use. Over time, though, it became interesting. The thing that became interesting was people started connecting undergraduate, or they were interested in connecting undergraduate research to the curriculum. And this was a big change. People wanted to create a more research-rich, connected, and scaffolded curriculum. Next couple of points. What the teams found, though, was it's a long haul to make these types of curricular changes. There's a long time arc, and there are a whole series of challenges. So this is sort of getting us to think about what the challenges are in terms of building these programs. So if I start on the left there, gaining understanding of the different disciplinary cultures. You want to do this campus-wide, you've got a whole lot of different entities that have different perspectives on what research is. Needed to rethink faculty workload and reward systems for tenure and non-tenure track faculty, create partnerships and community around these issues between faculty, students, and administrators, scaffolding linked to student learning outcomes. So you'll see in our current project, we started with student learning outcomes and built from there. Developing sustainable faculty leadership. So a lot about this is leadership. We laugh and say there are only 3 things you need to have to make these things successful. 1, leadership, 2, leadership, and 3, leadership. And that's a simplification, but not that far off, actually. We want to make sure we expand student participation, as we said, in terms of diversity and so on, and partner with students to really change the whole learning process that occurs. Next slide. So what does this project look like? Let me just give you a little bite-sized piece of how this goes, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff. So the next slide. This is our most recent grant. It's IUSE grant with that number, integrating scaffolding research into undergraduate STEM curricula, probing faculty, student, disciplinary, and institutional pathways to transformational change. Next slide. So the goals of the current project are to work with a group of partner institutions over 4 to 5 year period of time to conduct research on student, faculty, departmental, and disciplinary influences on the process of integrating and scaffolding undergraduate research throughout the curriculum. I'll show you exactly what those goals are in a minute. A key aim is to help departments better understand the factors that are conducive to institutional change. So this is very much about transformative change in terms of developing research-rich curricula and changing the culture of the departments if the culture needs to be changed. Next. So the essential elements then become evidence-based curriculum design, so backwards design, scaffolded curricula integration of research with faculty workload. We'll talk about workload and maybe ask you to focus on workload if you're interested. And then leadership development, and cultural change, and how those are connected. Next slide. So the overall curricular objective is to integrate the components and learning outcomes of high quality undergraduate research through 4-year undergraduate STEM curricula in the disciplines of biology, chemistry, physics, and psychology. Now we selected those because we really did need to shrink down the departments, and for the research part, we really needed to be a little bit more contained. So those are the 4 that we chose. But ultimately, it's to achieve cohesive curricula that initiate students in the culture and inquiry and research in the discipline. We're using an evidence-based strategy of backward design to build vertically scaffolded research-rich curricula. That is the goal of the project. Next slide. But there are 2 fundamental research questions. Obviously, this is an NSF grant, so it has research questions. One is about the student learning experience, and one is about the departmental culture and change that goes on. So what effect do student characteristics have on scaffolded integration of undergraduate research into the curriculum and student learning outcomes? That's the student-focused part. The faculty-focused part is how do different STEM disciplines and departments effectively integrate the components and outcomes of high-quality undergraduate research to reach more students. That's the faculty culture and change component of what we're doing. Next slide. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff after this one. So we had about 88 institutions apply to be part of the grant. We were only able to select 12 of them. There are 2 departments at each institution, so we have 24 departments total. And it's a mix and match between bio and chem and psych and physics, and different institutions have 2 of those 4 departments. The project goals, as we said, were to develop these backward designed, vertically scaffolded research experiences, and also to create this new knowledge. How does student learning get impacted by this? How does departmental culture and change get impacted by these sets of activities? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mitch. I think I'm going to be spotlighted now. I don't know if you can see me. Great. There I am. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We know how busy your schedules are and how much Zoom time and virtual time people are taking up with these days. So we appreciate you carving out some time for us. To follow up on Mitch's last point, about 90 institutions applied to the project. These are our 12 partners. And we have a diverse array of institutions that are working with us, some large, some small, research intensive institutions, liberal arts colleges, some public, some private, some HBCUs. So we're really thrilled with the level of engagement we've had from these campuses and the portfolio of campuses that are working with us. We're not going to name individual campuses today, but we will be sharing a number of presentations with these campuses in coming weeks and months, and we'll be sharing the broad results of this naming institutions later. One of the really important parts of this particular project is sustained engagement of our institutional teams and the consultants, and I'll mention the consultants in a minute. But from the outset, when the 90 institutions applied to participate and ultimately the 12 were selected, they committed to engage with us for 4 full years. That now has turned out to 5 with the COVID year. So we're able to continue 1 more year to bring the project to fruition. There's a significant amount of team engagement from the institutions. There's a coordinating institutional team. And remember, each institution has 2 departments that are participating among those 4 disciplines: biology, chemistry, physics, and psychology. And the institutional team has the leaders of those departmental teams, as well as typically someone from the provost office or the dean's office or the research office, and a variety of campus offices that have influence. And these campuses, although it wasn't directly part of this project, our hope and goal was that the campuses would begin to engage more departments beyond the 2 that are participating. And in fact, that has happened significantly. In addition to the institutional team, there are departmental leadership teams that have been stable and have been enhanced by additional members. Each institution agreed to engage with their consultant or a pair of consultants for the duration of the project, to really engage in the research component of the project and to maintain momentum throughout the duration of this project. We really want to understand what's happening transformationally with respect to the research questions and the curriculum questions. We also have engaged consultants who are working with the project and, importantly, with the teams over this sustained period of time. Each department has 2 expert consultants working with them that are helping to coach and to guide and to provide some accountability and to provide some support throughout the project. The consultants make annual visits to each of the departments at least once a year for an on-site visit. Oftentimes the 2 departments are combining, so they're having a unified visit. The consultants prepare progress reports that go to us and the teams, and the consultants are in regular, constant contact with the teams throughout the year through email, video meetings, conference calls, and so on and so forth. There's ongoing coaching and mentoring and guidance. What's been important for the project from the design, the original design and throughout, and we've made some tweaks, but there is an annual cycle of iterative work. So prior to COVID, in the before times, we had an annual collaboration meeting, a face-to-face on-site meeting at one of the PI's campuses or one of the participating institutions' campuses, where we had representatives from each of the departments and all the consultants and so on and so forth, sharing results, wrestling with challenges, sharing best practices, all the kinds of things that you would expect that were happening, learning a tremendous amount at those annual meetings. Folks would go back to their campuses and do iterative departmental work on their scaffolded curriculum, on their research questions, and so on and so forth. I'll talk about the tools in a few minutes. There's a 2 to 3 day site visit in there. The campuses are collecting data, surveys, interviews, focus groups. We have some project questions we'll address in a few minutes, as well as the individual teams have their own questions, and then more iterative work. All supported by ongoing coaching project webinars, resources throughout the project. One of the aspects that's been really important for this project, and we have learned a lot from and continue to learn a lot from, particularly when we get to the summative stage of the project right now over the next year, is common project tools. So each of the campuses is using a set of annual self-reflective tools, including an annual action plan that's linked up to their overall project outcomes and goals, as well as their institutional goals, a curricular scaffolding matrix. As I mentioned earlier, surveys and interviews. They do regular progress self-assessments and benchmarking themselves. The consultants write reports from their site visits. The departments write annual reports, and we have regular meetings between the consultants and the teams in an ongoing way. So this is a rich data source for us. In addition, as we mentioned, this is a research project fundamentally. It's a mixed method approach that treats the campuses as case studies, looking at quantitative and qualitative data. We have overarching Cur transformation project, that's Cur TP, questions that we're asking about the overall project. And our colleague Jillian Kinsey is the lead on that particular piece. The department teams are asking their own questions. We have common data sets. And again, we're treating them as case studies. So effectively, we've got 24 case studies through this particular project. I won't go through the next couple of slides in great detail, but you have access to the slides. We'll have access to the slides up on the website. This is a mixed method study using many data sources, including case studies, as well as a whole series of surveys. And we've used some standardized and validated experimental items from several sources. Also, as we alluded to, there are different levels of the scholarly questions that are being asked. We have some project-wide questions that are being influenced and contributed to by each of the teams, but the institutions are also asking their own questions, and we've wrapped those up and are learning quite a bit from them. So we're going to stop there and take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes or so, and answer some of the questions that are in the chat. And Mitch, since I'm presenting now, I can't see the chat. Maybe you can take a look at those.
I think part of what I'm seeing in the chat, folks are from very different kinds of institutions, not surprisingly. And I think the question always comes up, is this type of work applicable to all types of institutions? And what do you need to do, in a sense, to adjust or adapt this to a community college or a research university or a small private institution, big public comprehensive institution? Well, what would you say to that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Mitch, and whoever else, whichever attendees wrote those questions. So one of the goals of this particular project, so fundamentally, yes, the approach to making curricular changes, a four-year curricular change, and changing the kind of the departmental culture to be supportive of engaging in students in an investigative and a scholarly kind of approach can happen at all kinds of institutions. And one of the things that we are learning from this particular project, and that we will share broadly with the community at the conclusion of the project, is what are those elements that are common across all the different institutions? What are some common obstacles or challenges that you might see at the very beginning of a project like this, or at the middle of the project? So institutions that want to take this journey would be able to kind of head those off at the pass, if you will. We intend to both disseminate the outcomes here, but also share with the community a toolbox of tools that you might use. We were referencing the curricular scaffolding matrix and an annual action plan and several other tools. We want to combine all those together in a package of tools that we would make available to the community. One size doesn't fit all. One path doesn't fit every institution, but there are commonalities, and we'll share some of those with you shortly. Good question.
So there are a couple of questions about the consultants, the role of the consultants. how we selected the consultants, compensation for the consultants, and in a way, the question, and I don't have it right in front of me right now, but it's a question of what about accountability for the consultants? You know, how do we ensure that they're doing their job, doing the site visits, submitting the site visit reports, and connecting with the teams and so on? The role of the consultants.
Yeah, so I'll answer that first. Mitch, you might want to add to it. We selected the consultants through an application process as well. We sent out a call for consultant engagement in the lead up year to the project, and there was an application form and a series of expertise characteristics and disciplinary expertise that we were looking for, as well as wanting to have a diversity of perspectives and opinions and roles in the consultant pool. The consultants receive an annual stipend as well as their expenses for for participating in the site visits and coming to annual meetings. And they're evaluated annually by the teams that they're working with. They're providing us, the PIs, with feedback on the consultants in their annual reports. What was the nature of the engagement? What worked well? What didn't work well? How the consultants are working, and we are looking at the consultant engagement as well. The consultants are fantastic and are on the ground with the teams and really know the teams and are national experts in their field. Certainly one of the things that we are looking at carefully right now in our theory of change model and in the guidance that we want to provide broadly to the community later is, does this kind of effort, this kind of transformation require an external consultant to be with you for 4 continuous years? And the answer is no. But there are elements of that, like an accountability structure, that might be fulfilled by other internal constituents on the campus. So we're going to drill down on that and provide the guidance to the community that will be helpful. You might want to add to that response.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've said from the beginning, the real key to our success, if we've had success, which I think we have, has been the consultants team's relationship that they've built up over a number of years. And I think the accountability that goes with someone coming and visiting and having monthly phone calls holds the teams accountable for moving forward or explaining why they're, stuck in some place. So that's really been an important part. There's another question about administrative buy-in, and I'll answer this. I think one of the things we did well at the beginning was we have teams in the departments. So the biology team at a particular institution will be working on this, but there's also a campus-wide team that has some connection to the project. So it gets the conversation out of the department alone to a broader conversation on campus. And a lot of those teams have associate deans, for example. That's a common person to have, not a common person. That's a person who's commonly on the team. So that when that works, it works really well. I don't claim that works well every time. As we'll talk about later, turnover is a big issue in managing any grant of this size. Turnover is huge. Department chairs come and go, and deans come and go, and associate deans come and go, and so do provosts. And so it can get a little tricky to stay on top of that. But
yeah, I would just add, Mitch, that one of the things that we've learned in our prior projects and is illustrated very well in this project is the value of having a nested leadership team, and to think about that as a design element from the outset. And what we mean by that is having leaders in the project doing the work that are at different levels of the organization. Faculty leaders, department chair leaders, assistant associate dean leaders, provost office leaders. So there's a redundancy and there's a backup when this turnover happens, and that multiple members of the community own the project. Critically important. And again, that's anyone can do that, but we'll provide some additional guidance on that. Maybe one more question, Mitch, and then we'll go to the breakout.
There's a lot of questions about consultants, so why don't we hold off and we'll talk about those as we go, because
Sure.
For us it's a critical element of the grant, but it's not essential for institutional change to occur to have consultants. But so anyway, we'll get to it.
All right,
I want to get people in the breakout.
I'll share the breakout prompt. So we're going to walk through the breakout prompt and then give you the opportunity to select the discussion that you want to participate in. So our colleagues at AAAS will share with you momentarily in the chat a link to a case study document that we have prepared, not just Mitch and I, but our entire team. And Carrie Caruxis, who's on the call, was central to helping us develop this case study project. And they describe 3 different scenarios that a department might face if this department was going to launch a major curriculum revision project like we've been talking about here. And we want you to select, I mean, if we were in person, you'd be sitting at a table and you would pick as a group, but we're going to give the opportunity to join the breakout group that you want to focus on. One is focused on faculty dynamics. One is focused on faculty workload and faculty and departmental autonomy. And the third is on a sort of a departmental leadership piece. And as a group in your breakout session, we want you to talk with each other, introduce yourselves, maybe identify someone to facilitate the conversation, but to think through strategies that would enable the department in this case to move forward with their action plan that will help to vertically scaffold undergraduate research throughout their curriculum, which is the goal. And after the conversation is over and we share some more perspective on our project, we want to talk with you about strategies that our participants used to address kind of some of those common challenges as they were moving forward. And we don't want this to be deficit focused. We wrestled with whether we should sort of put this in there, but the fact of the matter is, if making this kind of curricular transformation was easy, it would have been done ages ago. As you all know, as we all know, there are obstacles, there are barriers, they're political, they're cultural, they're resource-based. So for a project like this to be successful, we want you to think through in advance, what might those issues come up to slow the work down and to kind of, again, head them off at the pass. Mitch, you want to add anything before we ask our colleagues at AAAS to share the breakout magic?
No, other than, we hope that folks will broadly talk about the topic first and then spend some time digging into their own situation and think about what they might want to take on. So the breakout room is helpful to have that broad conversation first, and then people can do their own thing. So we wanted to then move on to where we are as far as this project is, and give you some of the highlights of what we think we've experienced over the last number of years. So the next slide begins that. There were a number of challenges that people faced at the ongoing part of the project, what was clear was that it was really important to have a group that worked well together, were connected to the project, committed to the project, and was somewhat stable in the sense of sticking around. Personnel changes was really tough, and it's one that we've experienced before, and I've already commented on it. There was a lack of universal commitment to the projects, so not everyone's on board. So then what do you do? Ignore them or try to bring them along? I mean, you deal with these issues outside of this grant, obviously, too. So a lack of consensus on what the student learning outcome should be. So how do you adjust the outcomes and come up with an action plan that addresses them? And one of the things we've talked about a lot, which is there's a kind of a tension of sorts between who owns the classes, an individual faculty member or the department. And I'm all for autonomy, but there is a collective that needs to occur. The next part of the slide. There were conceptual challenges. There's a lack of understanding what's meant by undergraduate research or a research-rich curriculum, or which students should even participate, who we should focus on. So there were all those kinds of issues. There was a cultural shift that needed to occur to make things research-rich, course-based research. Is that something we really want to do? There was a lack of awareness of what backward design even entails and what does that look like. So we spent a lot of time talking about those issues with our consultants and our teams. Student learning that focused only on disciplinary knowledge. So that content question, which comes up all the time. And then people who are just skeptical about making these changes, the next piece. And then their infrastructures, people have started to bring up. Resources really matter, committed administrators really matter. We try to get people to think about connecting these to their strategic plans. And that's a really important thing if you can make that work, university-wide strategic plans even. And in some cases, departments were not really working all that closely together to sustain this and move things forward. Next slide, please. So what did people do? How did we get buy-in? What did these campuses do, to departments do to try to move things forward? So obviously there's a range of strategies. One of the beautiful things about these projects is you can't tell someone what to do because there's a local situation and there's a history that goes with it and there's a context, and it's the team's decisions as to how to move forward, not ours. Next slide. So what did people do to target some of these challenges? So the thing about curricular change, maybe pass-fail change or faculty reluctance, we really work with teams to think about what they're doing already that actually is already connected to the goals of the project. And people were surprised at how many things they were actually had ongoing. They may have been spaced out and not scaffolded, but there were elements that were already there. Connecting non-tenure track faculty into this was really important feature, especially for the campuses that were focusing, at least at first, on the intro level courses rather than focusing on the capstone courses. So a lot of non-tenure track faculty teaching in those intro courses. Some departments thought about a process for departmental reform document. How are you going to do this? What kind of decision-making were you going to engage in? Working together routinely is really important, and bringing in external consultants. There's a number of questions in the chat about consultants, and I'll get back to them again at the end, as they are, in a sense, the external people coming to campus. Next slide. And then there's workload. I mean, a lot of you went to the workload case. It doesn't go away, and there's no simple solution to the challenge. But being reasonable and setting goals, I think the teams that did this well had partnerships. They didn't just rely on a faculty member teaching the class. They had support in various ways to help them move these issues forward. Working groups were really essential in some departments to do this. There were incentives funds. The grant gave them incentive funds, so that was good. We had money available for the teams to work with. We hope that they augmented those with the institutional funds, giving people stipends to come to summer workshops and so on, stipends to prepare new courses. Those things are valuable. I think most faculty don't even want, what they deserve. They just want something, some modest amount even goes a long way. Involving all the faculty is really important, and then reducing redundancies is an important feature of this. That was something that people did early on. Next slide. Faculty autonomy is something we've already talked about, so I'll skate right through this, but there's lots of different ways to teach a particular class, and we don't want to minimize that, but we do want to make sure that there's an understanding, a broader understanding of what that course is all about when a lot of different people are teaching it. It's a shared vision, and I think the teams that have done this well have recognized the importance of that shared vision, and engaging in these conversations to make sure we understand what that even means was something that really mattered a lot. Next slide. So we talk a little bit about scaffolding, and there's a couple of little pieces to this slide that can, we want to make sure that all students have access to undergraduate research. I mean, part of the motivation, we haven't even said it, is that you might not be in a position to require all students to do undergraduate research. If you're in a big psychology department, that's not a reasonable expectation. So this is an opportunity to get all students research experiences of some sort, and then workload issues that involve faculty. Next slide. So this is a complicated slide. If you can pull up, I think there are 5 different little pieces to this one. I'm not going to go through them all, but recognizing the teams recognized that they had to focus on different aspects of what they needed to do to move forward. Curriculum being one of them, faculty and team dynamics being another. And when you get these slides, you can go through this more carefully if you're interested. Departmental and institutional culture really mattered a lot. The research component that was part of this grant and is part of the grant was important. And the dissemination, sharing it outside the department. That could be workshops, that could be presentations, that could be brown bag lunches, all those kinds of things. really mattered. These are the issues that the teams were taking on as they worked through this. And different people took very different approaches. Different departments took different approaches. Next slide. So just to give you a brief little snapshot of some of them early on, Institution A, for example, collected a lot of baseline data so they could study their students over time, so they had an understanding from day one of what the students were all about. They tracked the student survey data and outcomes and disaggregated it and looked at it carefully. Some of our teams, there was a question in the chat about the amount of change that different departments would undergo. And the answer to the question was, is there a big difference? And the answer is, yeah, there's a big difference in terms of what people were able to move forward, how they move things forward, what the outcomes were as they move things forward. So there's a whole range of different outcomes here from 24 different departments. We think of it, as I think Jeff points out later, as 24 case studies in terms of how to do this. The Institution A also changed their tenure and promotion documents to put looked at different teaching evaluation methodology and so on. Institution B studied how effective assignments are that emphasize research skills, looked at faculty workload. Institution C studied the impact of inquiry-based curriculum on student research outcomes. What was the outcome at the end of that process? And students' perceptions of their attainment, how much students think that they were improved or understood better, whatever it was they were looking at. Next slide. A couple more, and then I'm going to slide it over back to Jeff. But there's this culture shift but by year 2, some teams had made some notable progress. This is only year 2. They determined how they were going to make decisions. They had developed their learning outcomes. They mapped their curriculum and their outcomes to identify where they were. Which is an really important thing to do. They initiated and used assessment results as they worked through it. They shifted to faculty revising curricular and courses in groups rather than independently, and they had new faculty workload models. This is year 2. This is relatively early. These were some of the more impressive outcomes that we saw right off the bat. Next slide. And then we move. I'm sorry. And then as a result, they had more students involved in research. The students had increased perception of the research skills, enhanced sense of scientific agency. There was a lot of good things that happened as a result of those. And then there's one more little piece to this slide too, and that is the culture shift. And here's a departmental quote, and I'll let you read it. I don't want to read the whole quote, but you can see what this particular department. So this is from a department annual report. They say, in sum, there's a shared acknowledgement that undergraduate research is not only the work that we want to do, but the work that we need to do. And I think that was an important thing for the department to understand as they work through this. All right, next slide. And you can pop up all of these. There's 5 of them, I think. Yeah. So by year 4 now, so we're at the end of year 4. These are the kinds of comments that we were getting, and I'll let you just sort of browse through them. People focus on equity and efficacy, student engagement and excitement, connections to learning outcomes and how important that was. And then finally, the only one that I really want to be commenting on in this case is the one at the bottom right, which is more consistent emphasis on research, including in lecture courses. And we haven't commented on this, but the low-hanging fruit in a way for our science folks is the lab courses. Obviously, you can make lab courses more research rich, a lot easier. But we have really hammered our departments to think about the lecture courses, the non-laboratory courses, and how you can build research mindset into those courses. I think that's a really important thing to do. All right, next slide. And there's a whole bunch of strategies that people took, and I'm conscious of the time, so we'll pop them all up there, and I'll let you read them as you go through. But some of them, we have research universities, so graduates, teaching assistants really mattered. All of us have non-tenure track faculty, adjunct faculty, whatever they're called on your campus. They are really essential, and they've helped move this project forward in many, many different ways. And the bottom right, a department that did a summer faculty institute campus-wide for faculty so that they would have these longer conversations about these issues as they work through it. And then my last slide here, and then I'm turning it to Jeff. The next slide is you can see some of the other things that departments did. Leadership positions, they created kind of associate chairs almost. They expanded their leadership teams with administrators from outside of the departments. They had service positions that they created, and other departments looked at ways to get internal funding to get at some of the issues that I know some of you have raised. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he'll bring us home, I guess.
Great, thank you, Mitch. So in this last few minutes, and then we're going to do another breakout, we want to share with you what our current thinking is, how this theory of change is emerging relative to this particular project. Next slide, please. And there are a number of factors that are important here. And departments that use evidence-based principles for curricular design and are actively engaging and aligning faculty and student expectations are the ones that meet with success. So investing the time early on, the institutional context, the departmental context is important. If you could click through the next 2 clicks. One more, thank you. So we shared some observations about this last year in a volume by the ASCN, the Accelerating Systemic Change Project, which is also funded by NSF, and articulated 6 conditions that correlate with progress. Multiple and diverse campus leaders, maintaining interactions, the nested leadership piece that I was sort of referring to earlier. They developed an understanding of, and more importantly, used the many levers of change that were available to them on campus. This is not just about pouring more money in. If someone was asking in the chat, did these departments do this because they were just able to get resources? No, we actually provided them with not many resources. The third piece is to use assessment results meaningfully to drive curricular change. Having communication and decision-making strategies that kept the project effort, in this case, undergraduate research, front and center. That was really important. Exploiting synergies of this particular project with other student STEM successes or high impact practice activities. And then aligning the goals of this project with other curricular and cultural transitions to get broader departmental and institutional buy-in and to align those with those goals. And we worked with the campuses to do that. Some of it happened naturally as well. Next slide, please. So we want to share with you, again, some of the pieces that are shaping out in this theory of change. And then we want to give you a time at the end to have another conversation. So if you could click again. So ultimately what we're trying to realize here is the STEM departments with research connected, scaffolded undergraduate research curricula, infused curricula, and a culture that supports that. The institutional and departmental context was very important. Departments that had emerging cultures that had some form of undergraduate research already, or this could be your, whatever your project is. Undergraduate research was in, one or a handful of courses already. It wasn't completely unknown to the department. There was some knowledge already. Leadership teams were empowered. So they were empowered by the department, they were empowered by the dean, they were empowered by the provost to do the work. Administrative support. There was a commitment to assessing the impact of the work and a commitment to policies that rewarded what we were trying to achieve. So these institutions were committed to looking carefully at the structures and the culture to make the necessary changes. Next slide, please. And one more. So go back one. Yeah, there we go. So we've shared with you some of the interventions, but this didn't just happen all at once. And projects like this that are making cultural shifts, the expectation is that it cannot happen all at once. But there's a time arc, there's an investment over multiple semesters, over multiple years to make the effort work. So these are some of the interventions and inputs that we put in place. Again, not all of these per se are required, but the elements are. The consultants, for example, you don't have to have an outside consultant, but there needs to be the elements of what consultants were bringing, and we'll articulate that further. Next slide. One more click. There we go. So we were looking at indicators of success, and we've shared some of that with you already in the outcome section. Changes that are happening in the curriculum, changes in the dynamics of the department and the faculty and the teams, like working on a curriculum outcomes project as a department versus individually. The cultures are shifting, action and research activities were going on, and people were disseminating broadly on their campuses and beyond. One more, please. And we're looking at what are the key outputs that are important here and that can be measured and could track the change effort. There are some basic counts, how many people are involved, how many courses have been changed, and so on and so forth. But more importantly, it's the attributes of the department. When and how are those courses changing? How do faculty and students engage in the change process? When and how do policies change and to support more research-centric curricula? And there's a strategic approach about when you want to make those changes and how to initiate those conversations. Again, that are just coming to light. We'll share that in the next round of our efforts. I think that's it. So we've got about 15 minutes left. We did want to spend a few minutes and take your questions. Mitch has been responding to some in the chat, I see, but we can take a few minutes of questions, and then we wanted you to again engage in another conversation. So Mitch, is there a question or two?
Yeah, I think there's a number of questions from a little bit past about why do we think the consultants are important? What is it that they bring? And I guess maybe the second part of that question, if there were a second part, would be, can we do it without consultants?
Yeah, in fact, we just had a terrific Zoom meeting, webinar, not a webinar, an actual Zoom meeting with all the consultants last week. It was a sort of a focus group. And our sense is, no, the consultants, an external consultant isn't necessarily required, but there are elements of that consultancy, like an accountability structure that's really important. And we think that can be provided internally through a variety of mechanisms. Anything you want to add to that, Mitch?
No, but we've thought long and hard about this consultant question. And we still need to think about it even more, because it has become a more prominent piece of we knew from the beginning that the consultants were really important, and the selection of those people was really important, and it worked out really well. But I think their importance to what we're doing, we may not even have appreciated it at the beginning, how much impact they have. They're the direct contact between the teams and the project, and the PIs let the consultants do their thing. So that part's really important. There was another question in the chat at some point about what would it cost to do this if you had to pay for it yourself? And I'm not sure I have a good. Jeff's a provost. Jeff, what would it cost?
Well, you know, I think there are a couple of questions early on. This is what we have provided through the project is actually very little direct dollars to the campuses. But we have provided a structure, and we've provided tools, and we provided some expert guidance through the consultants and a degree of accountability. Certainly, I mean, as a provost and prior to this, as a dean, you know, I had resources that were available to bring in an outside speaker or to send folks to a workshop to get them started on a project. The sustainability of it is not through getting external grants, getting additional external grants. It's a revised curriculum that doesn't add on, but integrates the scholarly components into the bread and butter aspects of the curriculum. That's the desire that we've been trying to achieve, which leads to greater retention, which leads to greater completion, and so on and so forth. So there are things that you can do internally to incentivize it, maybe some reassigned time for a short period of time to revise some courses, maybe some reassigned time to to pull meetings together, an outside speaker, and so on and so forth, but with the goal of moving to sustainability? That's a great question, and I think as we wrap up this project this next coming year, I think that we to that question, we put together a sort of a toolkit that would include those kind of resources that you might be able to jump into it, and a sort of low investment, medium investment, and higher investment levels that might allow you to accelerate the time to progress. Another question, Mitch? We should.
There's a question about liking to hear more from the PIs about the role of the external evaluator.
Yeah,
I assume that means Jillian's work.
Yeah, we don't have a traditional external evaluator that's looking at the project outcomes and the efficacy of the workshops and those kinds of pieces. Jillian is an educational researcher who's involved as a PI and on the project, and we're looking very carefully at the project goals, the project engagement, as well as realizing the defined outcomes for the project. So we shared some of those in some publications and conference presentations, and more will be coming out.
So yeah, we in our previous grants, we had external evaluators, and it can work, and it worked fine. But we decided this time to have a person as a PI on the grant. So that's Jillian. Jillian does the NESE studies and things like that, for example. So she's got a real good handle on all of these kinds of high impact practices. So she works with the teams every year. She meets with the teams a number of times. She sets up meetings with them so they decide on what kind of evaluations they're going to do, what type of assessment data they want to collect. She helps them design the materials, the surveys or instruments. She helps them interpret the data if it needs to be interpreted. So I would say none of us, other than Jillian, who are PIs, are in a position to do that well. So for us, it's a key component of the project, that's for sure.
I think we've got about 10 minutes left. There probably is value in taking 9 minutes or so for you to talk to each other quickly, and then come back and have a short report out like we did before. If you could go to the last click. As we talked about a couple of minutes ago, in reflecting back on this project now at the tail end of it, the contextual elements of the project from the get-go were really important. And we'd like you to think about your project in the context, and have you taken those into account? Have you had to rethink that context as your project has evolved? And what might have emerged as elements that you didn't initially deem as important that are important now? And everyone's sort of at different stages of their projects. And how do those critical contextual elements, how will those shape your theory of change? I think there are things that we know now that we didn't know 5 years ago as a result. So we've rethought some of that early context and learned it about. So why don't we take 6 minutes, Mitch, or do you think it's just we should have the conversation here?
Let's just have the conversation here. I know people been slugging it out for an hour and a half and probably need to get on to something. Yeah, let's just take some comments from folks about these issues and see what people think about it, and we'll wrap it up.
Write in the chat. They can write in the chat or unmute themselves to share your perspective on the context of your project.
There are some really good points being made in the chat that I wish we had time to explore. Certainly, adjunct faculty issues are really important, and our grant, even the TAs who are teaching labs and so on, are really important. But I think the comment about from Mark, finding myself needing to ask the basic assumptions regarding what the institution's priorities really are, and I think that connects to comments being made earlier in the chat about workload and how you actually manage this and how you put in place a system that connects to institutional priorities and faculty time and connects those things in a meaningful way that makes sense to everyone, I think is really a fundamental question that Jeff at the College of New Jersey has taken on. Look up the College of New Jersey's way of dealing with workload, and you'll find something very, very a fascinating way of getting at it. But it's something, it does not go away. It never goes away. And we seem to kind of tiptoe around it and without making a whole lot of progress sometimes. But I think the whole workload connected to institutional priorities and high impact practices, for example, being one of those elements, is really important. So, all right, I think we should stop it there. I think there's AAAS has a comment at the end of the session, I believe. Thank you to everyone for coming. Hopefully this was a meaningful, useful thing for you. We do it because we like to share what we're doing, obviously, but we do it because we like to learn from what you have to say, and picking up on things that you've commented on is something that's really important to us. So thank you for that. Jeff, make a comment and then we'll turn it over.
Yeah, I would just add my thanks to for joining us today. We've learned a lot from your questions in the chat and those that spoke up, and look forward to hearing about your projects as we move forward. We will send the slides to AAAS to post up on the website, so you will be able to access these and dig in a little bit deeper. So thank you very much. AAAS, back to you.
Great, thank you so much. And before we go, I would just like to thank our presenters. So thank you, Dr. Malachowski and Dr. Osborn, for leading us in today's workshop. I'd also like to thank our AAAS IUSE team, Jennifer Crinsey, Iris Wagstaff, and Thomas Fague. And last but not least, I'd like to give a big thanks to all of you who joined us today for the workshop. We would love to hear what you thought of today's workshop, so please take a minute to fill out the survey that my colleague is posting in the chat now. You will also receive this survey via email. Additionally, a recording of the presentation and copy of the slides will be posted on our website in the coming week. And as a final reminder, we hope you can join us for the rest of the AAAS IUSE Summer Labs events. Our next event is a two-part workshop, Pedagogical Professional Development for STEM Faculty, from Individual Change to Community Empowerment, on Tuesday, June 5th and Wednesday, June 16th. The second day will build off the first day, so we encourage you to plan to attend both. And with that, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.